Most people live anesthetized against a perception that has already settled in and won't go away anymore. They believe that, if they rested better, that strange tiredness behind the eyes would finally pass. But what if your sadness weren't a problem to be fixed, but the invisible price of having understood too much? Arthur Schopenhauer grasped something dark about human nature. The exhaustion doesn't come from the body. It comes from a consciousness that has seen too far and now can't unsee. From that moment on, your entire relationship with life changes, because every existence hides two parallel truths. There's life on the surface, and there's what pulses underneath it, silent and indifferent. Whoever notices the second one begins to inhabit a very specific scene of everyday life. Picture this. You're at a bar table, at a family lunch, in a hallway conversation at work. People are laughing at some joke, commenting on the latest episode of some show, arguing about their soccer team, complaining about traffic. And there you are, in the middle of it all, smiling on autopilot, responding on autopilot, faking an interest that you can no longer truly feel. Inside, something is watching. It watches the people, watches yourself watching the people, and notices that you're miles away from what's happening. Not out of contempt, not out of superiority, out of a tiredness that has no name. The first question that comes up is both simple and cruel. Why does understanding the world more deeply seem to pull us away from life, instead of bringing us closer? Wasn't it supposed to be the other way around? Wasn't knowledge supposed to be the path to fulfillment, to meeting yourself, to the promised peace? That's what they said. That's what the self-help books repeat in chorus. Know thyself, expand your awareness, raise your frequency, and everything will fall into place. But it doesn't fall into place. Anyone who has actually walked this path knows that it doesn't end in celebration. It ends in a strange silence, in a distance that nobody warned you would come along with it. And then you find yourself in a place that nobody describes in the pretty books. The place of someone who has seen too much. The place of someone who can no longer numb themselves with the distractions that still work for everyone else. Schopenhauer wrote a work called The World as Will and Representation, published in 1818, and few books in history have been as honest as this one. The central thesis is hard to swallow, but it's direct. The world, according to him, is not moved by a divine plan, nor guided by a higher reason, nor does it carry a purpose built into its structure. The world is moved by a force he called the will, a blind, irrational, hungry will. It doesn't think or choose, it just wants, without ever resting. And it always wants more. This will is what pulses in everything. It's what makes the plant reach for the light, the animal hunt its prey, the human being crave status, money, love, recognition. It's the invisible engine behind every decision, every impulse, every movement. And here comes the cruel part of the thesis. The greater the consciousness of a being, the more it perceives this machinery turning, and the more it perceives, the more it suffers. The human intellect, according to Schopenhauer, was not made to give us peace. It was made to serve the will, to help the organism survive. It calculates risks and anticipates threats before they materialize, securing the ground necessary for the body to remain standing. But in some people, the intellect has grown beyond its original function. In some people, it has become a mirror that reflects not only the world, but also the very mechanism that moves the world. And once you see the mechanism, you can no longer take part in it with the same innocence. That's why the burden exists. Not because you're weak, not because you're going through a rough patch, not because you need more sunlight, more exercise, or more gratitude. The burden exists because your intellect has outgrown its own function, and now it watches from the outside a game it can no longer play from within. Think about the people who seem genuinely happy. I'm not talking about those who appear happy on social media. I'm talking about the people who actually seem to live lightly, who laugh at small things, who get excited about their next trip, their next car, their next professional achievement. Schopenhauer made an observation that may sound cruel, but it's accurate. These people suffer less because they see less. It's not a question of raw intelligence. It's a question of depth. They are so immersed in the immediate stimuli that they can't see the structure of the game they're playing. And that's precisely why they can play it with more joy. I know it's hard to hear this. It sounds like a phrase of intellectual superiority. It sounds almost like an insult. But Schopenhauer wasn't saying this to brag. He was describing a phenomenon he himself was living through, one that weighed on his days constantly. He envied the naive ones. He envied other people's ability to entertain themselves with anything, to believe in the common promises, to want what everyone wants, and be happy with what everyone gets. He knew that the burden of understanding is, in large part, the burden of no longer being able to numb yourself easily. You've probably felt this already. You sit down to watch something, and within 5 minutes you spot the formula. You listen to someone telling gossip, and you see the psychological mechanism behind every sentence. You walk into a store, and you see the engineering of desire in the prices, in the displays, in the way the products are arranged. You open a social media app, and you notice the algorithm offering you exactly what it calculated would keep you there, and that very perception ruins the pleasure before it even starts. It's exhausting. It's exhausting because you can't switch it off. The eye that sees has no pause button. And here comes a concept Schopenhauer borrowed from Eastern philosophies, one that became central to his thinking: the veil of Maya. Maya, in the Hindu tradition, is the illusion that covers the world, making it seem solid, stable, meaningful. It's the veil that makes life seem fair, makes love seem eternal, makes success seem genuinely important, makes time seem linear and purposeful. Most people live beneath this veil, without even knowing it exists. For them, life is exactly what it appears to be. The veil is not a problem. The veil is the world itself. But some people, for reasons no one can quite explain, tear the veil. It might be a great loss. It might be a definitive disappointment, one of those that reorganizes what you believed about others. It might be a long period of loneliness. It might simply be an obsessive curiosity that kept pulling on the thread until the entire structure came apart. The path doesn't matter. What matters is that, once torn, the veil doesn't put itself back together, and the person begins to see what lies behind it: the repetition, the vanity, the emptiness embedded in every promise, the circularity of desires, the fact that everything that seemed important was important only because the veil made it seem so. This is one of the cruelest parts of the burden: the irreversibility. You can't go back. You can't unsee. Even in your best moments, even when you manage to distract yourself, even when you laugh at something, there's always a voice in the back of your mind that knows it's temporary, that knows the excitement will pass, that knows the happiness of the moment is just a truce, not a destination. And that voice doesn't shut up. You can drown it out with work, with substances, with relationships, with travel, but it's always there, waiting for the silence to start speaking again. But before we get to the darkest point of this perception, there's something that needs to be said, because without it, the rest doesn't make sense. Schopenhauer didn't describe this state as a curse he invented. He described it as a structure of existence itself, and offered, in the end, a way to walk through it. Hold on to that, because it'll come back with force later on. The philosopher described this state with an image that may be the most well-known of all his images. Human life, the philosopher wrote in Parerga and Paralipomena in 1851, swings like a pendulum between suffering and boredom. When you want something and don't have it, you suffer. When you get what you wanted, after a brief moment of satisfaction, you sink into boredom. And boredom pushes you toward a new desire, which will produce new suffering, which will produce new momentary satisfaction, which will fall into new boredom. The pendulum never stops. No one escapes it. But those who understand too much feel both extremes much more intensely. Desire hurts more, because you know you're being moved by a machinery you didn't choose. Boredom hurts more, because you know that achieving the next thing won't solve anything. You end up in an uncomfortable limbo. You want, but you know that wanting won't save you. You have, but you know that having doesn't fill you up. You're always somewhat outside the game, even when you're playing it. Think about modern life, with its apps, its notifications, its next achievements always promised for tomorrow. The whole engineering was designed to never leave you sitting in boredom for too long. There's always a next scroll, a next episode, a next professional goal, a next possible love, a next purchasable pleasure. For someone still inside the veil, this is entertainment. This is life. This is movement. For someone who has torn the veil, this is Schopenhauer's pendulum spinning in slow motion, every single day, from sunrise to sunset, and the person feels every swing in their flesh. The blue light of the phone on your face at 3 in the morning. The credit card bill that arrives by email at the start of the month. The silent notifier of the messaging app that blinks even when you no longer want to reply. Each of these small gestures is part of the same structure, a market dynamic that learned to turn human attention into fuel, and that needs, in order to keep functioning, for no one to stop long enough to notice what's happening. Lucidity, in this context, becomes almost an involuntary act of resistance. You didn't choose to see the machinery, but once you've seen it, you can no longer take part in it with the same surrender. And it's strange to realize that this tiredness has no scheduled hour. It can show up in the middle of a meeting, in the middle of a celebration, in the middle of a night that was supposed to be light. Suddenly something weighs on your chest without warning, and you have to pretend everything's fine because explaining would take more effort than continuing to pretend. This daily pretending is one of the quietest forms of exhaustion, and those who understand too much learn early on to live with this exhaustion on their back, like someone carrying an invisible backpack that others can't see. And then comes the loneliness. It's no coincidence that so many deep people are so lonely. Schopenhauer had a line that many people use as social media decoration, but few actually live. Solitude, he said, is the fate of all elevated spirits. Not because they chose it, but because depth charges a price that few are willing to pay. When someone thinks a lot, their peers grow scarce. The conversations that could nourish that person simply don't happen in the usual places. The subjects that truly matter are considered too heavy, too loaded, too intense for the emotional temperature of ordinary gatherings. The person who thinks a lot starts to notice that they have to trim their own thoughts when speaking with others, translate them into a shallower language, make them fit into a box that wasn't built for the size of what they're carrying. Over time, they get tired of translating themselves, and silence starts to feel more comfortable than the effort. Without peers around, isolation settles in. And this isn't a dramatic isolation, with curtains drawn and the lights turned off. It's a more subtle isolation. It's the increasingly frequent refusal of social events. It's the preference for one's own company, even when it hurts. It's the strange sensation of feeling lonelier surrounded by people than alone at home. Isolation sets in as a way of saving energy, of avoiding the wear and tear of constant translation. And alone, thought deepens even further. Without the interruption of everyday contact, without the noise of other lives crashing against yours, it gains room to descend into layers that hadn't even shown themselves before. And depth produces more loneliness, and loneliness produces more depth. The cycle closes. There's no way out without losing something. I understand perfectly when you feel that no one truly gets you. I'm not saying this to give you cheap validation. I'm saying it because Schopenhauer had already mapped out this cycle in the 19th century, and the fact that you feel it today, with your phone in your hand and your urban routine, shows that he wasn't wrong. The loneliness of depth is a historical constant. It crossed the centuries. It will cross through you too, if you don't know what to do with it. And there's an even more subtle layer to this loneliness, one that few describe. It's not just the absence of peers on the level of ideas. It's the absence of peers in the very way of inhabiting time. Those who understand too much tend to live at a different pace from the world. They take longer to respond because they need to actually think before they speak. They hesitate before getting excited because their enthusiasm has been filtered through reflection before turning into reaction. They postpone the decision because they see consequences in layers that others don't even notice. This mismatch of pace creates an isolation that is almost physical. People talk fast, decide fast, get excited fast, and those who think a lot are always half a step behind or half a step ahead, but rarely in step. Over time, this mismatch piles up, and silence starts to feel not only more comfortable, but more honest. And Schopenhauer offered an image that may explain better than any theory why this loneliness happens. The parable of the porcupines. Imagine a group of porcupines on a very cold night. To withstand the cold of the night, they draw close to one another, seeking the warmth that only contact can provide. But as they get closer, the spines of one stick into the other, and the pain drives them apart. When they move apart, they feel the cold again. And then they come closer again, and they hurt each other again, and they move apart again, and they freeze again. The parable is cruel because it's exact. Every deep human relationship works this way. Those who feel too much hurt and are hurt more easily. The intimacy that warms is the same one that wounds. The distance that protects is the same one that freezes. And life turns into this tired negotiation between the warmth that burns and the cold that paralyzes. Whoever understands this usually chooses a middle ground. Far enough not to be hurt, close enough not to freeze. But this calculated distance is, in itself, a form of loneliness. You're always in a relationship, but never fully inside it. Always present, but never whole. And the others feel that, even when they can't name it. They sense that you have a part you don't give. They sense that you live behind an invisible glass pane. And many times they read this as coldness, when in fact it's a survival learned through pain. Maybe that's why so many people who understand too much simply give up on parties, celebrations, social rituals that used to be part of life. It's not arrogance. It's exhaustion. It's the realization that the energy spent looking interested in subjects that don't interest you, laughing at jokes that aren't funny, faking enthusiasm for things that no longer stir anything, is energy that could be going towards surviving your own existence. The world keeps offering the same menu. Weekend talk about what everyone's going to do on the holiday, consumer plans that never end, novelties that bring nothing new. And you keep sitting at the table, fork in hand, realizing that your hunger has changed, that what used to feed you no longer feeds you, that you need something else, but that something else isn't on the menu and maybe doesn't even exist in the places you frequent. And then comes the guilt, because you look around and everyone seems to be enjoying it. Everyone seems to be eating with pleasure. And you ask yourself if the problem is yours, if you've gotten weird, if you've turned bitter, if you've become difficult, if you've turned into that boring person nobody wants around. The guilt of no longer being able to entertain yourself with the superficial is one of the most treacherous parts of the burden, because it makes you think you're sick when in fact you're just awake. It's completely valid to feel this. It's completely valid to feel out of place, out of tune, out of step with the collective rhythm. I'm not saying this to make you anxious, but to wake you up from a confusion that many people carry their whole lives without ever being able to name. Your sense of not fitting in isn't a manufacturing defect. It's the natural consequence of having looked at some things with more attention than most. Schopenhauer called this state the melancholy of genius. And here it's important to draw a distinction that he himself drew, and that many people today confuse. Philosophical melancholy isn't the same thing as an emotional condition that requires professional support. A prolonged sadness that settles into the body, that takes away sleep, that changes appetite, that makes it hard to function in daily life, is something else, and deserves all the attention and care of qualified professionals. If the internal weight is too great to be carried alone, and if everyday life has become hard to sustain, seeking professional support is an act of courage, not weakness. The melancholy Schopenhauer was talking about is something else, though it can blend with the first one in some people. It's a structural sadness, not a circumstantial one. It doesn't come from a specific event. It doesn't go away when external conditions improve. It's a sadness that comes from the very structure of those who think a lot. It's the realization, deep in the chest, that even under the best possible conditions, life would still be this repetitive machinery, this eternally postponed promise, this pendulum that never stops. Recognizing this melancholy without romanticizing it is the first step toward not drowning in it. Because some people turn melancholy into an identity, turn the burden into a trophy, use suffering as a sign of superiority. Schopenhauer would be horrified by that. He didn't write about suffering to create an elite of sufferers. He wrote so that whoever suffers could understand their own pain and find, within it, a way out. The diagnosed melancholy is the beginning of the path, not the destination. And what comes now is what few have the courage to admit. even among those who have made it this far into the reflection. Maybe this is the moment to pause and look at some of the promises the world has offered you throughout your life. Promises that many still chase, even after realizing they don't deliver what they promise. The career that always demands one more rung to bring the recognition that's still missing. Romantic love presented as that right person, capable of filling the emptiness. Success translated into a bank account number, as if any number could be enough. The status maintained as social armor, so that other people's respect can prop up a self-respect that never arrives. Schopenhauer dissected each one of these promises in his writings, especially in the aphorisms on the wisdom of life, part of Parerga and Paralipomena. And in all of them, he found the same pattern. The promise is never fulfilled on the level it was made. You get the rung, but within a week you're already looking at the next one. You find the person, but within a few months, passion gives way to routine and boredom. You hit the number, but the number turns out to be insufficient compared to the next benchmark. You earn respect, but respect comes with the pressure of holding on to it, and the fear of losing it becomes greater than the pleasure of having it. The will, Schopenhauer said, is never satisfied. It uses every conquest as fuel to generate the next hunger. And those who understand this too soon feel a premature aging of the soul. It's not bitterness. It's the tiredness of someone who has already seen the end of the movie before the reel even started rolling. Everything feels already seen, even what hasn't yet been lived. Other people's celebrations sound like echoes of a joy you know to be temporary. Other people's achievements look like stages of a path you know leads nowhere. And here lies one of the greatest dangers of all this lucidity: the danger of absolute pessimism. Many people, when they first discover Schopenhauer, plunge into a paralyzing nihilism. If nothing has meaning, if every promise is a lie, if the will is a blind machinery that will never stop, then why try? Why move? Why choose one thing over another? And the person freezes in an inertia that imprisons them, a way of existing that isn't peace. It's an existential paralysis in disguise. Before we continue on this point, let me ask you something that will make a difference in what comes next. If you're enjoying this content, check the first comment for our exclusive ebook, Alchemy and Archetypes. It deepens many of the themes we're crossing through right now, especially for those who have reached the point of wanting to transform the burden of consciousness into something that sustains life instead of paralyzing it. And that's exactly the point. Schopenhauer didn't preach a radical renunciation of life. He didn't preach inertia. He didn't preach despair. Those who read the philosopher only at the first layer think he invites you to the abyss. But those who dive into the entire text notice something else. He pointed out suffering precisely so that one would seek a way out, not so that one would sink into it. The diagnosis isn't the treatment. It's only the condition that makes treatment possible. And it's here that his thinking turns towards some ways out. Ways that aren't cheap optimism, aren't self-help, aren't magic formulas. They are dense, demanding, but real paths. And the first of them is maybe the most accessible to everyone: art. Schopenhauer dedicated pages and pages to aesthetic contemplation. For him, when you're standing before a symphony, when you lose yourself in a novel, when you spend hours observing a painting, when you watch a movie scene that paralyzes you, something very specific happens. The will, for a few moments, falls silent. The desire that normally pushes you forward ceases. The constant calculation of the intellect stops. You simply are there, inside that experience, not wanting anything, not chasing anything, not measuring yourself against anything. These moments are rare and brief, but they're real. And for those who understand too much, they aren't a luxury. They're medicine. They're necessary pauses in the machinery that normally crushes you. Art, according to Schopenhauer, is one of the few known ways to temporarily suspend the tyranny of the will. Not forever, but long enough for you to remember that there's another possible state, another way of inhabiting your own skin. Think about the times when you sat down in a chair, put on headphones, and listened to a song that seemed to have been written for what you were feeling. Think about the moment you finished a book with that hard-to-describe feeling, an inner silence that lasted for hours. Think about that movie you watched alone, and when the credits rolled, you sat there, unable to get up, because something had rearranged itself on the inside. Those weren't moments of escape. They were moments of presence. You were more there than almost anywhere else. The difference between art and distraction, in this sense, is radical. Distraction takes you out of the present, takes you away from yourself, offers you a place of not being. True art does the opposite. It brings you back. It demands that you be fully there, even when what it shows is uncomfortable. And it's that demand that produces the inner silence afterward. You cross through something, and crossing through changed you a little, even in ways imperceptible to others. Schopenhauer understood this with rare precision. For him, aesthetic contemplation wasn't a luxury for the elite. It was a door accessible to anyone, as long as that person was willing to stop demanding that art be entertainment, and accept that it could be, in certain moments, a form of revelation. If you're someone who understands too much, deliberately cultivating these moments isn't intellectual fussiness. It's survival. It's setting aside time, week after week, for aesthetic experiences that for a few moments erase the background noise of the will. Not as entertainment, but as a spiritual exercise, as breathing for a soul that usually can't breathe. And there's a second way out, Schopenhauer proposed, and this one is maybe even deeper: compassion. And here we need to be careful with the term, because today the word has become almost a social media cliché. Schopenhauerian compassion is something else. He founded his entire ethics on this idea, in a book called On the Basis of Morality, from 1840. And the thesis is this: all of us are manifestations of the same will. Beneath the apparent differences, we are the same force expressing itself in different bodies. When you recognize the other's suffering as being, in essence, the same suffering you feel, something shifts. The distance between you and the other shrinks. The loneliness of lucidity finds, for the first time, a way to build a bridge. Think about it. You feel isolated because you believe that few people feel what you feel. But what if that were an illusion? What if there were many more people carrying this same burden in silence, ashamed to admit it, afraid of looking arrogant or weird, hiding behind automatic smiles exactly what you're hiding? Statistically, it's very likely that among the people you cross paths with every day, there are several others in the same condition. Not the ones who speak the loudest, not the ones who seem the happiest, but the ones who listen more than they speak, who observe more than they react, who think 3 times before responding. Compassion, in the Schopenhauerian sense, is the recognition of this silent community. It's looking at someone and realizing that there, behind that ordinary face, there might be someone carrying the same weight. And this recognition, although it doesn't eliminate loneliness, transforms its quality. You go from a loneliness of exception to a shared loneliness. And shared loneliness is no longer the same thing as isolation. That tired driver in the afternoon traffic, his eyes lost on the red light. The supermarket cashier who smiles mechanically, but whose eyes are somewhere else. The coworker who talks too loudly in meetings and disappears into the bathroom during break time. The old man sitting alone on a park bench, watching the pigeons without really seeing them. You don't know the story of any of these people, but Schopenhauer would suggest that, beneath the surface of each one of them, the same will pulses, generates the same desires, produces the same disappointments, and may carry, on some level, a weight similar to yours. Compassion begins when you stop measuring the other by what they show and start imagining them by what they probably hide. And hold on to this, because what comes next will give meaning to everything that's been said so far. There's also a third way out, and it's the most radical, and also the most difficult. Schopenhauer was deeply influenced by Eastern philosophies, especially Buddhism and the Upanishads, sacred texts of Hinduism that he read in a Latin translation and that changed his way of thinking. From those traditions, he drew an idea that sits at the heart of his final proposal: renunciation. But pay attention, not renunciation as repression, not as punishment, not as a moralistic escape from pleasure. Renunciation as conscious liberation. The logic is this: if the will is the engine of suffering, If every desire produces a new desire, if the pendulum never stops because you keep feeding the machinery with new wants, then one way out of the circle is to stop feeding it, not chasing every desire that arises, not believing in every promise the world offers you, not identifying with every impulse as if it were an order that has to be obeyed, watching the desire be born, watching it want to be obeyed, and choosing, consciously, not to always obey. This doesn't mean becoming a monk. It doesn't mean renouncing life. It means understanding the mechanism of desire to the point of not being its puppet. It means making choices based on something other than just the next hunger. It means, at certain moments, simply not doing, letting the purchase slide, holding back the reply, stepping away from the next search, resisting the urge to fill every emptiness, and realizing, after some time, that the emptiness that seemed so frightening was, in fact, a place where something different could finally breathe. Those who have walked this path describe a form of peace that has nothing to do with happiness. It's not joy. It's not euphoria. It's a quietness, a sense that the background noise has diminished, a perception that the pendulum, though it keeps swinging, has lost part of the power it had over you. You still feel desire. You still feel boredom. You still feel pain, but there's a new distance between you and those sensations. You observe them instead of being swallowed by them. And this quietness, when it sets in, changes small things in everyday life in ways that nobody around you can notice from the outside. The way you drink a glass of water in the morning without rushing to already be doing something else. The way you listen to someone speak without mentally rehearsing your next response while the person is still forming their sentence. The way you walk down the street, noticing the shadow of the trees on the ground, the sound of your own footsteps, the wind shifting direction. None of this seems like a big deal. But it's exactly in these small gestures that the stilling of the will shows itself. Not in a mystical ecstasy, not in a blinding revelation, but in a daily life that finally stops being a race and starts being a crossing. Schopenhauer called this state the stilling of the will, and he didn't write about it as abstract theory. He wrote as someone who tried to live this proposal, to a greater or lesser degree, throughout much of his own life. His biography, with its difficulties, its bitterness, its mistakes, shows that he himself was not an enlightened saint. He was a man with his own stumbles. But the philosophical proposal he left behind still stands, even when the author failed to live it perfectly. And many after him have found in this proposal a way of existing that sustains depth without collapsing into it. Now, before we wrap up, it's worth listening to a counterpoint voice. Because this voice took up Schopenhauer, admired him in his youth, and then disagreed with him fiercely in maturity. Friedrich Nietzsche started out as a disciple of the old philosopher from Frankfurt, but at some point he changed course. Nietzsche also saw the suffering of existence. He also saw the emptiness embedded in the promises. He also knew the weight of understanding too much. But his answer was different. Where Schopenhauer said renounce, Nietzsche said love. Where Schopenhauer proposed extinguishing the will, Nietzsche proposed embracing it, transforming it, giving it a creative shape. He created a concept that became known as amor fati, the love of fate. The idea of accepting life exactly as it is, with all its horrors, its repetitions, its pains, and not just accepting, but loving. Not as masochism, but as affirmation. Saying yes to the real, even when the real hurts, because saying no is what produces the worst suffering. I'm not going to choose between the two philosophers here. Maybe you'll need both of them at different moments in life. There are times when renunciation is the only possible path. There are times when affirmation is the only way to stay standing. The burden of understanding too much can end in serene silence or in fierce affirmation, in contemplative withdrawal or in creative surrender. What it can't end in is escape, because escape, in the end, is just another way of obeying the will, only now with the excuse of consciousness. And maybe that's why this burden, deep down, isn't a curse. It's a crossroads. You only reach this crossroads because you've seen too much, and once there, you have to choose a path. It can be the conscious renunciation that brings peace. It can be the fierce affirmation that turns pain into creative strength. It can be the aesthetic contemplation that offers pauses of stillness in the middle of the machinery. It can be the compassion that reconnects you to the other after the long isolation. Each of these paths is a possible answer. None of them gives you back the lost innocence, but all of them offer you a way to keep going, with dignity, after the veil has been torn. I know it's hard to hear this. Maybe you were hoping for a lighter answer, a simpler solution, a more immediate comfort. But Schopenhauer never promised comfort. He promised honesty. And maybe that's exactly what you need right now. Not a pretty quote to set as wallpaper, but someone looking you in the eye and telling you that yes, the weight is real, but the weight can be carried in another way. Not in escape, not in despair, but in conscious silence, in art, in compassion, in chosen renunciation, or in fierce affirmation. Maybe the burden of understanding too much wasn't meant to be removed. Maybe it was meant to be transformed. To stop being a weight that crushes you and become a density that roots you. To stop being a sentence and become a vocation. To stop being the reason for your tiredness and become the reason for your depth. And this transformation doesn't happen in an insight, doesn't happen in a video, doesn't happen in a book. It happens in the patient darkness of ordinary days, when you decide, once again, not to run from what you've seen, and at the same time, not to sink into what you know. If this video touched something inside you, if you recognized yourself in any part of it, leave a like down below, so more people who carry this same burden can find this content in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel to follow along with the next reflections, because the path of those who think deeply needs company, even when that company comes in the form of words on a screen. And if you want to go further, if you want to dive more deeply into these themes, check out our Members Club, where we go deeper into each of these ideas in exclusive content made for those who are ready for this crossing. And one last question, not for you to answer right now, but for you to carry through the coming days. If understanding too much is a burden that won't go away, what form will you choose to carry it in from now on?